Hi everyone, it's Rachael here. Welcome to this brand new episode of the Ditch the Diet podcast. Well, it has been quite a week for the podcast this week. This is the third episode, but this is not a bonus episode. This is a full episode of the Ditch the Diet podcast. So if this is your first listen, if you are a new listener, you have stumbled upon the Ditch the Diet podcast, which is a podcast that I created 2 years ago to help cut through the bullshit of the nutrition and diet industry and bring you the truth when it comes to things like diet, food, weight loss, exercise, and everything that goes hand in hand with that. Ditch the Diet podcast is a spin-off from the Ditch the Diet Academy, which is what I like to call the alternative to going to a slimming club, where we teach you the exact strategies in order to improve your relationship with food and your body so that you never have to go on a diet ever again. The Ditch the Diet Academy opens its doors 3 times a year to join. And one of those times is coming up really soon. Mid-September is when we are opening the doors again. However, we also have some exciting news in that I am running a 5-day introduction to Ditch the Diet programme starting this Sunday, the 1st of September. So if you haven't already joined that yet, then you need to head on over to ditchthedietacademy.com/5 days. That's the number 5 and the word days. And you can register there and start with us for 5 days on Sunday to find out what Ditch the Diet is all about and if it would be suitable for you. So, on the topic of nutrition myths, today I am talking to Performance Nutritionist Elly Rees about one of the biggest nutrition myths out there, and that is weight loss is as simple as eat less, move more. Now, I suppose it's not really a myth, so to speak, because we all sort of know that in order to lose weight, we have to burn more calories than we eat. But if it was as simple as eat less, move more, then why is it so difficult to sustain anything? And that is what we are talking about today in this episode of the podcast. We also briefly touch on whether going gluten-free is healthy for you and whether that's the truth or not. So stay tuned and enjoy the episode. I'll be back at the end to tell you a little bit more about where you can find out more about Elly, what she does, how she might be able to help you, and also a little bit more about the Academy. So I thought the best way to get started would be to just have a little bit of an introduction. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. My name's Elly Rees. I'm a performance nutritionist originally by trade. I did my undergrad and my master's predominantly with the focus of working with athletes. Then I spent the first sort of few years of my career working in different clubs with footballers, rugby players, things like that. And I was personal training on the side to sort of earn a bit of money, and I found very quickly that I was enjoying doing that more than I was working in clubs, and it made me realise how much of the nutrition side of things that I wanted to do with general populations. Mm-hmm. And that's where I decided to sort of go away and set up my own sort of business where I could sort of make long-term change and interventions with people. And I'd say that I've sort of been doing that for about the last 18 months to 2 years now. Okay. Which has led me on to wanting to start sort of learning about my PhD and learning about whether I can take it even further than I have so far.
Yeah. What is your PhD topic?
So I've designed it myself. So I haven't applied for one because there wasn't something out there that I found matched what my passion was. Mm-hmm. So I took a proposal to one of my old lecturers and said I would be really interested in doing this as a PhD. And he said, well, if you propose it to the university and they get it approved, then you can do it just like any other PhD. It just costs you a lot more money rather than the university.
Yeah.
So that is going to be around food behavioural traits, how the environment affects things, how food choice affects things, the way that we consciously and subconsciously think about food, and sort of just making a more relevant, up-to-date recommendation around people's ability to choose what's best for them and how their behaviour affects it. I think it's really easy to prescribe a diet to somebody and really easy to make a plan, but there's one reason or another that they will or won't uptake that plan, and that 9 times out of 10 comes down to their mentality. And I think that needs to be the first approach for a lot of practitioners out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, this series that we're doing on the podcast at the moment is about nutrition myths, but I've been chatting to a few people today, and we've also sort of been like saying that, like, it doesn't matter what, it could be like the best diet plan in the entire world that you're following, but there's just so many other factors involved than just simply, you know, what you eat and how you exercise. There's so many different things that influence the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis, and the behaviour around food is something that really fascinates me. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it as well. So we are going to have a chat about the environmental influences on the choices that we make about food, and sort of dispel the myth that it does just come down to eat less, move more, which we all know is like scientifically true when it comes down to it. We need to burn more calories than we eat if weight loss is the goal. But why do so many people struggle with it? Why can't we just stick to something? So, but before we do that, let's talk about the most common nutrition or diet or health myths. What is the most common ones that you hear, like, in your line of work when it comes to like food, nutrition, diet, that kind of thing?
I'd say most recently it's been about the importance of breakfast. A lot of people are doing intermittent fasting these days, and there seems to be more and more evidence supporting its use. I myself found it to be very useful for the way that I live my life. And it's a lot of people asking whether this is the right thing that they should or shouldn't be doing, or whether what's the reasoning behind skipping a meal and what it really means. And then the other one, I guess, is a lot of the time it comes down to these sort of slimming worlds and Weight Watchers and things like that, asking whether they work, and if they do, why do they, and if they don't, why they don't. And to be honest, they always come back to the same answer on nearly 90% of the questions I get asked, and it's what's going to work for them. So many people will prescribe on a populational basis in order to get the biggest revenue that they can. But if you're ever going to really succeed, you need to understand what's right for you. And for someone like me that's always been deathly afraid of breakfast and can't stand the idea of eating in the morning, intermittent fasting suited me down to the ground. But I could equally have a client that wakes up and the first thing they think about is food, and missing that breakfast is a real challenge for them. So there's no point telling somebody to do that if you know that that's not going to work for their lifestyle. So I would say particularly those are the ones that are most common. And then you've got sort of all the other ones a little bit around there that drop in every now and then with the typical supplements or type of diet. I would say like the ketogenesis one is also a really popular one at the moment.
Yeah, it seems to be doing the rounds again right now. Quite a lot.
But again, it sounds repetitive, but it is always the same answer. You've got to find what works for you. No matter what your sister does or your sister brother's husband says, there's something that's going to work for you and not someone else.
Yeah, I completely agree. So when it comes to your interest in environmental influences on food choice and things like that, was there what got you interested in that in the first place? What was it that was there a specific moment that you said, this is what I want to do? Or
I think there was a couple of times. I've always been interested in nutrition because I was born a celiac, so I've always had to have such an interest in what I was allowed to eat and what I couldn't eat. After I sort of realised that the athlete side of things wasn't for me, and that didn't really give me much job satisfaction, it was when I started to work with general populations, and I started to, as you do when you're a young professional, you make all these plans, you spend hours and hours typing away, making what you think is the best plan possible. And you would have client after client coming in weeks, months later, and they're just not succeeding. and you're frustrated for them as much as you are yourself. And it was sort of the more that sort of happened, and the more that I started to ask why things weren't working rather than just do your plan, that made me really sort of cue into the fact that people just aren't taught what to actually do with things. And I went to go see a talk a couple of years ago, and I can't remember the guy, but he made a very valid point about a lot of nutrition practitioners. And he said many people are trying to treat the waterfall before the pond. And people, if someone comes in and they have an iron deficiency, people will just prescribe iron. Rather than saying, why have you got an iron deficiency? Why are you at this point right now? Is it because there's something lacking, or is there something that is going wrong within your general day-to-day basis or your lifestyle that's causing this? It's all too common to walk into an office and say, oh, you've got an iron deficiency, here's a tablet. And that's what I thought really did sort of make me click onto the fact that, I mean, you can prescribe any diet in the world, but unless I understood if someone was going to do it and they understood how, it was just never going to be, the success rate would be far, far lower. Yeah,
I've seen that a lot in previous work as a PT years ago as well, feeling frustrated. Why aren't you sticking to this kind of thing? And that was like quite naive of me, like maybe 10 years ago now, a long time. And when I look back, I think, oh, I wish I knew then what I know now about behaviour change and things like that. So when we talk about the environment affecting our food choice and perhaps even having an effect on our health and our weight, what do we actually mean? What do you actually mean when you say environment?
So that I would tend to classify as an external influence. So something that's beyond our control and something that's going to make you choose something without, well, sometimes subconsciously and sometimes consciously. But I always define it if that scenario wasn't there. So say if that chocolate bar wasn't there, would that decision arise? And if the answer is no, then it's going to be an environmental influence over it is internal. So if I decided that I was suddenly craving chocolate and I decided to leave my flat and go and find that, that's an internal influence. I've decided and actively chosen to go and find something that I believe I want at that moment. If I've just put petrol in my car and I go up to pay for the petrol and there's a chocolate bar on the side and I just grab that, in my opinion, is an external influence. And if that chocolate bar wasn't there, that decision wouldn't have been made at that point. And that's kind of the route I go down when I try and separate the two.
I think when you said about going into the petrol station there, I went into this. I'm going off on a tangent. You'll find that I do this quite a lot. I went into a shop. I won't name which one it was, and I went to pay for whatever it was that I was paying for. I can't remember. It was a while ago now, and there was like a big basket next to the till of chocolate, just like bags of it. And I said to the cashier lady, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna grab one of them. She's like, oh, would you like, you can get two for, if you buy two, it's like, if you buy three, it's cheaper than buying two or something. I don't know. And I was like, oh. And I said, oh, and I said to her, like, thanks very much, but no, I know what you're trying to do. And she said that they call them impulse bins. Impulse bins or impulse buckets. Yeah. And they're like placed strategically around the shop in order to influence people's buying behaviour, which is quite scary because sometimes you can get home and you're like, God, I can't even remember buying that. And it's like...
people think that's just at the till, but it's done everywhere. Around the supermarket. We are directed into choices so much more than we are. There's a reason that fruit and veg are at the beginning of the supermarket, and there's a reason that bakery is at the back, and there's a reason. There is so much behind it that people don't get told or would ever understand. Brands pay through the nose to get eye-level products. If you're not an eye-level product, your likelihood of being bought is substantially lower. There is so much that influences things that are put on the end of the aisles rather than along, are made to sort of stand out because of one reason or another. And there is so much that we choose without even realizing that we're choosing it. And for a long time they started trying to get rid of this impulse thing, because I think it was Tesco that was the first that started to try put healthy snacks near the tills.
That's right.
But the rest of the place would be just as just bad, and people, it once you've changed the behaviour into a certain way, it becomes a habit. So there's a big difference between just sort of trying to influence and do it for the long term than simply change one minor aspect. And still so many supermarkets do exactly that. They put impulse things everywhere.
And what I think is, this is obviously going into policies and things like that, which I won't go into, but when the government say that they're trying to reduce obesity rates by like 2030 or 2050, these kind of things, but then they allow all of this to go on in the background, it's like a little bit of a, well, you're saying this but you're doing something completely different. So what other things do people need to be aware of in the environment that are perhaps influencing their choices when it comes to what they're eating?
So food labels is a big one. There's a lot of legislation around food labels that a lot of people aren't aware of. So if something says it's low in sugar, it has to legally abide by a certain rule. However, that means that they don't have to describe on the packet how much fat is in it unless they, apart from being on the actual food label, which most people won't read. The parameters of a label also isn't explained. So a lot of the time when you buy a product, it will say per 100 grams or per serving. That per 100 grams is again legally obligated to be on every single food product out there. But it doesn't tell you whether that's high or low. So if you had a product that had 30 grams of sugar per that 100 grams, that's classified as a high sugar content. But unless they decide to do the green light system, which has been proven to be pretty useless, a person wouldn't know that, and they might look at it something that says, oh, this is low calories, but actually there's a significant amount of sugar in it instead. And this is where the whole thing with yogurts came out. A lot of people were buying these low-fat yogurts thinking they were the next thing since sliced bread, but really the only thing they were doing was removing the fat and putting sugar in instead.
So the sort of traffic light system on the front of some of the packages, that's not like what's the word I'm looking for? They're not obligated to do that. It's a choice, isn't it, for food companies?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, and then what, as a person that doesn't know anything about nutrition or public health or anything like that, that's out
Sorry,
there.
someone's just banging at my door. Sorry.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Okay. Could you do it another day? I've just got... Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I thought I'd locked that.
That's all right, don't worry.
Carry on.
Yeah, so as someone that is perhaps like making, like in the supermarket, you go in and you're doing your shopping, like if I didn't know what I knew, I would look at these and see the greens and the yellows and the reds and probably make food choices based on that, thinking, exactly. That's like all green, so it must be healthy, but it could be a can of sugar-free Red Bull or something like that, and that would come out as all greens.
Exactly.
So there are ways, obviously there are some benefits to that system, but what do people have to be mindful of if they are going around the supermarket doing their shop and they are using the traffic lights, like the green, amber, red system on the front of packages? How do we navigate that so that we are seeing through?
So I always say, if you're looking for a product, decide at that moment before you purchase something why you're looking for a certain product. So somebody would maybe looking for, like you say, a packet of pasta. So they've decided that they're looking for pasta. So on that green light system, they will have, they have to have the typical ones like the salt, the sugar, the fat, things like that. But if there's something like your carbohydrate value that you want to know, or particularly one that's always tends to be missed is fibre, that if it's not what the packet wants it to be, it will not be at the front of that packet, it will be on the back. So I always say look for what you think you're looking for and look at the back of the packet for the actual sort of mark. So whether it is fibre, whether it is carbohydrate value, whether it is sugar, there'll be a reason why it's not on the front, and there'll always be something missing on that front that they don't have to put there for a reason. So if something says low sugar, then check the fat content. If something says low fat, check the sugar content. Always look for something that's not on that forefront of the packet, and you'll soon sort of see where the other things are creeping in. And then there is also something that I think it might have been Public Health, they released a while ago. It was apparent there was actually a chart that was made in terms of what was good and bad in these products, but most people have never heard of it before. So for instance, if you were to buy something that had 17.5 grams of fat in it per 100 grams, it could be classified as sort of a higher level of fat. If it's 5 grams or less, it will be allowed to say low fat on it. So if something said was 12 grams, it wouldn't have either label on it, but you would then not know whether it's high or low in something. So people should know what it is that constitutes those definitions, and they're all accessible again on, like we say, that Public Health and things, but it's just not spoken about and not preached about because marketing and advertising companies don't want us to know that.
Yeah, I know. It's when you really look into it, it's quite scary about all the things that influence the food that we buy. And you know, even if you are relatively good at navigating all of this, and you can go into a supermarket, you know exactly what you need, you go in, you buy what you need, and you leave. There is then the environment of going back into your own home, which I don't know if you think the same as me, but a lot of the people that listen to the podcast are, you know, mothers, parents with kids, living in a family home that is perhaps not, like, their environment is not set up to be productive, to make the changes that they want to make. I see this all the time. What sort of changes, so if one of the listeners, for example, is struggling to stick to anything, this is something that I hear all the time, the exact words, I know what I should be doing but I'm struggling to stick to it, whatever that thing may be. Healthy eating, just perhaps as a blanket sort of statement. Are there things in the home environment that can affect food choice as well, even if you have gone to the supermarket, made the healthy choices and brought them home?
So like you said, with parents, the big one, because there's probably a lot of food that they'd be willing to buy their children that they want to avoid themselves. So I tend to try and bring in sort of a separation technique. So if there's an area in the kitchen that you allow the children to go, then that needs to be somewhere that is named for the children, and needs to be physically labelled. A lot of people make these choices and don't bring it to the forefront of their mind by physically seeing it every day. If you're writing labels up and you're leaving things out that you visually see, you're far more likely to be able to commit to that behaviour. You can then label something else in terms of that's a parent only cupboard, and that's something that applies to you and you only, and that can be something that you can then set up and make sure the right foods are in there. Simple things like spending an hour a week. I say simple, obviously it's not as easy when it comes to parents, but people are very good at buying lots of fruit, I find. This is one of the big ones I find. And they say, I just never end up touching it because it just goes in the fruit basket and I leave it there, or it goes in the fridge and it just doesn't get eaten. And as much as I have the intention when I buy it at the supermarket, it's left. So what I always say is that as soon as you're back from the supermarket, whatever fruit you get, chop it all up immediately and put it into the fridge with your Tupperwares. Once that's done, it would take you 10-15 minutes. Throughout the week, you can pull out those Tupperwares and you can eat them there and then, and you don't have to have that conscious thought. But it's making those active decisions in the very first instance. A lot of the time, like you say, you can come home with all the right things thinking you've done it, and they end up getting left on the side and then thrown away 3 days later. And then if that all else fails, the other thing I do is the 3 R's. So if there's ever a decision that you're trying to make, either in the home, when you're out, whatever, then say you're trying not to eat a certain food and you're trying to stick to something, ask yourself whether you can either replace it with something better. If you can replace it, then great. If you can't replace it, then you remove it. So this is where the all or nothing sort of, a lot of people find that if I say, you can allow yourself this, this week, they're like, no, I can't. If you allow me anything, I'll go up to 100 with it. So that's when you have to initiate a bit more of a removal system in the initial circumstances. And then you have routine. So if a parent goes out at, say, 3 o'clock every day, and they know they're picking up their daughter, and they know that they walk a certain way, that means they will end up going into a certain shop, or they'll end up doing a certain routine day in, day out, which results in a behaviour that they're not happy with, then change that routine. Do something that means that that behaviour won't happen. Whether that means just getting on your bike so you can't physically stop, or whether you come home and you're used to the kids running in and doing something. If something you can do can interrupt that routine, you're far more likely to be able to make those changes a little bit more successfully.
I think that is such good advice. That can be literally applied to anything.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the environment, is it a case that we just have to educate ourselves better on what is going on around us and just become more resilient to it, I guess, because the supermarket situation is definitely not changing anytime soon. Obviously we can have a bit more of an influence over what's going on in our home, perhaps not as much in the work environment, but is it a case of just becoming more aware and becoming more resilient?
I think unfortunately at the moment that is the case, because the people that should be taking responsibility, like we say, aren't. If it was my decision, there would be a nutritionist in every single GP's office. So many issues that could be had and said could be dealt with by a nutritionist, and somebody able to deal with those sort of health factors. I think schools aren't doing enough to teach kids, to teach parents what it actually takes and what it actually means to be healthy. I think once kids get to the point that they're starting to take ownership over their diet, again around that sort of 15, 16 age, there's no education there whatsoever. So unfortunately it does fall on us, because the people above us aren't doing their job properly. So it does require some conscious research, some conscious time at looking at things and finding out what it is actually that's best. And the information is out there, but unfortunately we have to dig deep to find it. And there's more and more people now, and social media and things like these, and definitely things like these podcasts are really good to help people get the information they need in those small snippets and drive them the right way. And hopefully there's more people like us out there doing it for the right reasons, and trying to get people where they need to be for their health and not for any other reason. But unfortunately I think, for at least, like you say, at least for the short term, it seems like the buck's going to stop with us for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it looks like it. I've got a listener question to ask you.
Shoot.
Which came in last week, which was quite good because I think it ties in really well with what we're talking about. I'm just going to read it straight verbatim. How do I get over the mindset of I need to have the whole bag / packet of whatever food treat as a treat? If I try to have a small amount of a treat, I become restless and nervous and won't rest until I've finished the whole thing. I don't want to completely avoid the treat so that I don't binge terribly when I give in. What are your thoughts?
That's a really, really common question. A lot of people dabble between, like we say, either that all or nothing movement or the allowances movement. So the first thing I would say in that decision is, like she said, she's a bit unsure whether she needs to remove it or try and allow herself certain amounts so that when she does allow it, it doesn't become a binge. So the first thing I would do is look at your behaviour in more of an outer sort of region. Are you quite an all or nothing person anyway? Do you find that you throw yourself into something for 2 weeks and then you kind of give up? Or do you find that you can develop new habits and you kind of keep them for a while, but you maybe go from 5 times to 2 times a week, but you do continuously do them? So have a look at your own behaviours a little bit and see what it is that you do that suit you on a daily basis, because these types of decisions are a lot easier once you start to understand the way that you think about things. Then after that, you can then do maybe a few simple little hacks that will maybe help. So things like, say we're talking about a chocolate bar. If you buy a multi-pack of chocolate bars and you bring them home and you find that you're quite likely to not be the person to have one and leave the other 4 for another day, then simply don't buy a pack of multi-pack. You go and you buy one chocolate bar and one single chocolate bar at that matter. And having the strength to do that in the initial instance reduces all of that mental torture a bit later on down the line. A lot of people buy these multi-packs or they buy big bars thinking this will last me forever. And unfortunately, myself included, we're just fooling ourselves that that's going to happen.
I just can't even buy them. Like exactly. You say, like, I just don't do it. If I want chocolate, it's going to be a small bar.
Exactly. And if you do want an allowance, then that's absolutely something that we're all entitled to. But for instance, my chocolate habit used to be absolutely awful. I just couldn't say no to it. So what I find now is that if I buy a single twirl at some point, I know what that's worth. I know where it fits into my diet, and I know that I can account for that. But I still would not trust myself to buy a big bar of dairy milk, because I know what that would result in. As much as I tell myself it won't, it's having the strength to admit to ourselves that it will.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to admit that you don't have the strength to do that, because like we've just been talking about, the offers, the special offers in supermarkets they're
all there.
They're there to make you buy a lot more of like chocolate, and I'm pretty sure that this person is talking about chocolate. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I know who it's from. And like myself included, I know that I cannot be trusted, and I cannot trust myself. And it's like, it's cheaper to buy like 200 grams of chocolate than it is to buy 100 grams. It's crazy.
It costs 80p to buy a single 12, but it costs £1 to buy 4.
I know, so it's mad, isn't it?
They're not doing anything to help us in that fact, and sometimes we have to lump it over our own sanity than the expense, unfortunately. And like we say, that's not always the reality in some cases, but if it can be, then it will go some way to help, for definite.
Yeah.
And then I guess from that is when she could come back to those 3 R's and work out what it is that's, like she says that she may find that she says that she really wants chocolate at this moment, but does she really want chocolate because she's had a really stressful day? Has she actually looked at what's causing her to have these thought patterns? This is another thing that I think is really ignored. People come home and they say, oh, I've had such a stressful day, I deserve a glass of wine, I deserve a... So you've already fallen into that reward mechanism without even realising that you have. So it's also looking at the behaviour that's making you think that you require that treat. Are you doing it out of stress? Are you doing it out of the fact that you're watching Netflix on repeat and you're bored out of your mind, and suddenly your mind goes to food because you're bored? So first look at the reason why you're having those thoughts. If it's because you haven't had something for a long time, and then so be it. Have yourself a treat. Is it the fact that you're coming home every single night, Monday to Friday, and you're stressed and you're rewarding yourself with something? Then maybe it's time to look at how you manage your stress before anything else.
Absolutely. And just before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on another nutrition diet myth that still goes around all the time, that you reminded me of when you said that you have celiac disease.
Yes.
So that your life has to be completely free from gluten, wheat, and anything that contains the protein gluten. So before I ask the question of is gluten-free the healthier option, just briefly explain what celiac disease is for the listeners so that they know.
So celiac disease is an autoimmune disease. So it's a dysfunction that tends to be genetic, but a lot of people find that they don't find out about it later on until later on in life. I am quite a rare case in the fact that as soon as I moved on to solid foods, so when I was about 18 months old, and as soon as I started to eat more sort of bread and carb-based things, they found it quite quickly. So I don't know any different. But it's something that is in your small intestine that causes a reaction. And it's not the same as an allergy. You don't come out in hives, you don't go into an anaphylactic shock. And that's the difference between, a lot of people think it's an allergy and it's not. It's an autoimmune disease, and you're missing something in the body that enables you to break down those proteins. It's also not an intolerance. Intolerance is, again, a different spectrum. And it doesn't fit into the categories of sensitivity or not. Celiac disease is separate in that respect. There are a lot of people that are now gluten insensitive, which is more towards a spectrum of being able to tolerate a certain amount of gluten. And I do believe that as humans, we, just like with any food, are very individual in what we can and can't tolerate. And that's where I think the confusion comes a lot of the time.
Yeah, because you see a lot. Not it's more it's more prevalent now, and people are more used to seeing it. But there was a time where, probably I think maybe 7 or 8 years ago, just going by my own dieting history, that gluten-free was seen as being the thing to do for your health, and I still hear it quite a lot. Like, I was listening to a podcast just the other day, and someone was mentioning, if you have this problem or that problem or this problem, just remove gluten from your diet and you will be cured. And then you see things like on packaging, saying gluten free. In fact, I've got, like, you know how one of these little naked bars in front of me here, I just had that just before, and it says,
and it's on there.
Yeah, it says gluten, wheat and dairy free on the front, and it's almost there like a badge of honor, like, this is gluten free. So a lot of people ask me, okay, this says gluten free in the front, does that mean that it's healthier? What are your thoughts? And does that annoy you because of your health condition? It must get so annoying when you hear people saying, "Oh, I'm cutting out gluten because someone told me that that's what I need to do in order to lose weight / cure cancer / do all the things that people tell you that it can do."
Following a gluten-free diet, people tend to do one of two things. They will remove gluten from their diet completely, and then they will replace it with what you call the equivalent of gluten-free products. Gluten-free products are renowned for being far more processed than normal foods, far more chemically based. There's a lot of things in there that are put in there to allow it to have texture that ordinarily it wouldn't have, because it doesn't have gluten in. Most biscuits, cakes, anything like that, alternatives would tend to be far more calorific than a regular not gluten product. One slice of bread for gluten-free tends to be around the sort of the 120, 140 mark. You can get a decent wholemeal slice of toast for 80 to 90 calories. There's no reason that you're doing that in terms of that perspective. You then have the other alternative where people remove gluten, which means they inadvertently remove a lot of the carbohydrates from their diet. So they will remove pasta, they will remove bread, they will remove couscous, things like that. And they will think that they will may or may not lose weight because of that. But that's not because of those products specifically. It's because they probably removed products that they were quite easily overeating. And again, it has nothing to do with whether it was a gluten-containing product. It's to do with the fact that they are probably inadvertently making healthier choices. So they're probably eating far more vegetable-based dishes as a response, because they no longer have a carb that's making up the entirety of their meal. So those choices tend to be inadvertent. And again, that gives the impression that the gluten-free approach is what causes this to happen. But that's very, very unlikely. It's likely to be the fact that you've actually started eating less and started eating better, because a lot of processed foods, a lot of the rubbish out there contain wheat and contain gluten. So if you just start trying to avoid it, you will inadvertently probably eat better.
Yeah. That's interesting. I have a real problem with gluten, digesting gluten. I do not have celiac disease, but I cannot tolerate it at all. So it's
and that's, I think, the spectrum. I do 100% believe that some people can tolerate a slice of bread a day and they're fine. Some people can touch it once a week and they're fine. Some people can eat 3 bowls of pasta a day and they're fine.
I know, it's interesting, isn't it?
And they will still always show up negative on a blood test, because unless you have the autoimmune disease, the IgG blood test you need to show celiac disease will always come up negative. But that doesn't mean that you can tolerate unlimited amounts of gluten. And it's the same with dairy. Dairy tends to be a spectrum. I have found recently that I can tolerate a certain level of dairy, but I know where that line is for myself now. But it doesn't mean I go around shouting saying I'm now dairy intolerant. It means I can have 3 cups of tea and I'm fine. But if I tried to have a big bowl of yogurt after that, I really wouldn't feel great. And it always comes down to the same thing, like we said. I might find that, but you might find that, like you say, if you can tolerate absolutely none of it, you know that in yourself because of how you feel. So don't try to conform to a diagnosis just to suffer.
Yeah, that's it. I know. All right, let's wrap up there.
Beautiful.
Just before you go, I've got some true or false statements for you.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So at the end of all of these episodes, we are doing a bit of like a true or false, truth or dare, not truth or dare. truth or true or false. Let's just go for true.
Yeah, let's do it with the true and false in there.
Okay, so here are the questions. Should I use protein shakes after I go to the gym? I am just an everyday regular gym user.
Oh, that was a tricky one. Going with the majority, false.
Okay. Do I need to cut anything? Do I need to cut out my favourite foods from my diet if I want to lose weight?
False.
Should I drink celery juice to detox my body?
False.
That's the worst one. Is there this is a yes or no, is there a specific diet I should follow if I want to lose weight? Is there one that I should follow?
No.
If anyone who is listening to the podcast wants to find out more about you, what you do, or how you can help them, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
So you can go social media, which is Ditch the Myth, that's on Instagram, or they can go straight to my website, which is eleanorrees.co.uk.
Fab, I'll include all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode, everyone. I really enjoyed recording it. It's amazing just how much our external environment can influence the choices that we make on a day-to-day basis when it comes to the food that we eat and the way that we actually live our lives. It's quite an interesting topic. It's something that we do talk quite a fair bit about in the Ditch the Diet Academy because it is so important to your success when it comes to managing a healthy weight and lifestyle as well. So if you decide to join our 5-day introductory program, you'll find that a lot of the focus is around creating the best environment that you possibly can that will help you to be successful on your journey. And speaking of which, please make sure that you have signed up before Sunday so that you get all of the resources and everything that comes with the course. And you can do that by going to ditchthedietacademy.com/5 days, the number 5, the word days all together. Or just scroll down on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening, and click on the link that is linked there, and it will take you straight to the sign up page. So you can do that right now. Thank you so much for listening. This is the first in our series, our Nutrition Myths series. So we'll be back next week with another episode of the Ditch the Diet podcast. Thanks for listening.